Hello, and welcome to part 2 of having a look at the PIXAR ship shape challenge inside of Solaris. I glossed over the whole material approach using our own principled shader and relying on the USD preview surface to do the rendering inside of RenderMan, which we're seeing on the tugboat. We should cover how to actually use RenderMan shaders and assign them to the geometry. And let's pick up where we left off with the material library and the prune and the ASMAT pup boat. What we want to do now is focus on the robot. And for that, we're going to go to our prune, unbypass it, and we can press the drag and drop the robot. Now, you can work with the display flags right here in the scene graph as well. Why am I using the prune? I like networks. The networks are very convenient to work with, and it gives me a nice placeholder that shows the artist where to go and what to do. And it's nice when you're starting to build these templates that are become an archetype for how you work. Since you can have a SOP geometry, you always want to do material library with a prune, and then you can just do the material assignments. So you can build these locations in a simple graph, drag and drop this whole network onto the shelf, and voila, you've got yourself a template. It can show you how to do that really easy. You can go voila, drag this whole thing, take a snapshot of this, and drag and drop it right to the shelf. Let's drag and drop it over to here's good enough. And now we got a and I'm just going to do accept. Just create a generic shelf tool up there that you can then work with. And of course, if you press that, you're going to generate a new network type there. So you can build these templates really quickly. I'm going to blow this away, and let's keep on working. So we now want to add another assigned material. And let's place that below our first assigned material. And space G in the viewport. And if we want, we can just move the display flag to this particular material as well. And space G in here as well. Or we can go to the Houdini GL for now. Space G. And there's our robot. And we can now go back up and take a look at the material library. We have the RenderMan preset browser. Remember, we installed that last time. If you don't know how to do this, right mouse on there, and you can see here you can choose the RenderMan preset browser in any pane. And on the other side, we have the RenderMan textures, where we can actually apply the texture maps for this particular scene, automatically convert all the text files over into materials that we can use. But first, let's focus on the materials, then we'll worry about the textures a bit later. So, in the aluminum oxide, I'm thinking that using a ceramic type finish on top of the root robot would be a good idea to place to start. So, in the ASMAT, and let's rename this one, and pup robot, and in here for the let's choose where in the hierarchy we wish to grab and assign the shader at the root level. We can see here that we have at the geometry, we have the robot level, and then we start delineate between the various different pieces. So if we want to assign a material to the entire robot that builds a little bit of a material hierarchy, we can do that by assigning the material to the base robot. Now we need to build that material, and let's use out of all the materials that we have inside of here, let's choose, as I said, I really like these ceramic materials as a start, so I'm going to use the alumina oxide one. Now, bear in mind that this particular tool is designed for the /OBJ context, and I don't think it's the workflows anyway have been ported over to work nicely in the LOPS layout. So we're going to have to do a little bit of hijinks, so good that I'm showing you this. So if you right mouse on any of these materials, it's meant to import and assign to an object selection. It does not work with LOPS selections at this point in time, or Hydra selections. So this is meant geared for /OBJ. If you choose it, nothing will happen, but it will add a material to the /mat root library location. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to press import. Now, if we go to the material palette, we can see that there's our global /mat directory, and here we have our stage manager. The material palette, it's not the most intuitive thing to work with when we're wanting to manage materials. It's more for just creating materials in a single location. For instance, I can't drag and drop that into there. But what I can do is do a bit of a cheat. I can select this, and then I can go to this material directory. And I'm going to create a a jump hotkey by pressing Control 5, and I set a quick mark, and I'm going to Control X this. I'm going to cut this, and I'm going to go back to the material palette, and I'm going to jump, use by selections and I'm lazy. Go to the material palette, select one of the materials where we want to go, and it automatically jumps Houdini's contexts to this new. Remember, Houdini's just a folder system at the end of the day. And Control V. And let's add a Control 4 for a hot mark. So now we can jump quickly between the two material networks as we build up our materials. Now this is a PIXAR material builder, and this is pretty much good to go. Just to let you know though, there's no parameters raised up in here. If you wish to change any of the parameters, you have to double click on this and dive inside, and here you can see you got your aluminum oxide shader where you can actually start changing all the various different properties in here. You'll notice that almost all these folders are stowed, so if you want to start taking a look at all the advanced features of this particular material, you can do that. Typical RenderMan material, lots and lots of control, and also you've got these slots in here that you can wire in different PIXAR type shader nodes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here, and just so we don't get too confused, I'm going to put these two materials into a network box. Obviously call this for the pup materials. Pup boat. That was from our previous exercise. And over here, let's put this into another network box. Oh, didn't want to do that. Select this network box, and let's call this, double click on there, materials, and let's call this pup robot. And let's make this a bit bigger because I'm anticipating to do a little bit of work. And as we said before, we have the material flag on this particular operator, which makes it into a material. We can go to the material library now, and we can press autofill materials, and we can see it added our aluminum oxide material. And now we can go back, and obviously if we scroll down here to the very bottom, we can see that in our materials folder in the scene graph, we now have aluminum oxide material as well. And now we can assign this to our robot. So material path aluminum oxide, we can drag and drop that to this slot here. And at this point in time, it's probably a good idea to save. So I'm going to save as, and let's call this materials. Because once we start flipping between different render delegates, I find once in a while you will unfortunately get a crash. And especially switching between Karma and Mantra, Mantra and Karma, there's still some bugs that need to be ironed out. And we'll see how we go. And the problem you have is these render delegates have a nasty habit of kicking you right out of your scene. So save often when you're doing this sort of work. Anyway, let's go to RenderMan 23.2. It fires up, and there's a really nice shader. We notice that OpenGL, Houdini GL, I mean, didn't pick up any of these particular changes, but it did, and let's deselect the robot. So let's just Shift N, or go to select mode and then Shift N to deselect that so you don't get that yellow highlight. And we can see we now assign a material to all the robot pieces. So there's this inheritance model. If we assign a material at a certain top level, all the children underneath that level will inherit that material. One of the beautiful behaviors of using USD and material assignments. So if you wanted to then start just simply working on the antenna, you can actually assign your material at the antenna level. I tend to, you can see that there's a base level, a top, and a wire. I tend to apply the materials right to the meshes though. I like assigning to the mesh slots many times, but if you're in SOPs and you're changing the name of those mesh slots, but not the parent transforms, you can assign the material to the parent transforms as well. It's up to you how you want to work. Now, let's have a look at how to build a composite shader, because right now, let me save again, and let me go to Karma. We'll notice that Karma is not picking up the material. So, we now know when we use the principled shader, it would build this USD preview shader. And it's obvious now that we can only use a select few materials to build these USD preview shaders from. Principally the one that we converted and focused the most on is the principled shader. And we saw that last. So let's go into the material library, see if we can build a composite material. Let's go back to Houdini GL. Oh, by the way, we're done. If you want to start using all the RenderMan materials and starting going, there is a couple more things we're going to take a look at about assigning textures to texture slots. So you might want to join in about another 5 to 10 minutes. And ignore what it is we're doing now if you don't want to have any interest in how to build a composite shader, because it's a bit of work to do this right now. So what we're going to do is put down a principled shader. Let's go to the material palette. And I know we got a nice white porcelain shader. We can drag and drop that in. And let's tap the 4 key to jump quickly back to our material here. And here's our white porcelain shader. Let's stow that. We don't need to see all the inputs. And in order to build a composite shader, at this point in time, we really can't work on this material as it is, and I'll show you one of the reasons. So by using a collect material or VOP, we can take the surface and wire it in. But if we take this alumina oxide here and we wire it into the collect, we're going to get an error. So at this point in time, you can't wire directly one of these material builder nodes directly into a collect. But what I can do is double click and dive inside of that material. Grab this alumina oxide, Control C, go up, Control V. At this point in time, it looks like you can't really wire these material builders into a collect in this particular version of Houdini. But now we can take our BXDF and wire that into the shader collect, and that will work. And what I'm going to do here is under this collect, I'm going to double click on this. I'm going to call it porcelain. And so now we got a white porcelain, alumina oxide going into the porcelain. So we now have several materials. What I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the material flag from that and just leave it on the porcelain. So now we've got alumina oxide, which is assigned currently to the robot, but under the porcelain. And just to make this obvious, we're going to change this color to a glaring red, just so we can see for now that it is working. There's a differentiation between a white porcelain and alumina oxide. Again, save. Because we're going to go up and we'll start playing with render delegates. And so we've got our material on the ASMAT robot. We go to the material library, and again we have to press that magic button, autofill materials, and it adds the porcelain material on top of the alumina oxide. And of course in the material slots down below we can see there's our porcelain material, which we now want to assign to our robot. So if we go down, and we grab our porcelain material, drag and drop that into, wrong slot. Let's go to the ASMAT pup robot. Scroll back down, pick up our material, porcelain, and that's our composite material. And we drag that and drop it into there. And we can see that immediately, sometimes you don't get an update immediately. This time I got fortunate, and that Houdini GL did update. But if we go to Karma, now we can see they've got a red porcelain material assigned. And if we go to RenderMan, we now get RenderMan material assigned. And there we go. And that's how you build a composite material. Again, one by one, create materials, assign them. This means that you can also use the RenderMan preset browser to pick up materials that you might have constructed in other applications that support this workflow. For instance, if you've been using Maya a lot and you've built a lot of these RenderMan materials, you can bring them in. Or if other people share materials, you can load them into this view and then work forward. Now, the final thing we want to look at is how to use these input slots on materials to assign textures to the various parts of the materials that we want to work with. So let's dive back into the material library. And let's take a look at our alumina oxide material that's been pulled out. Let's drag that down a bit. And in this one, we can actually unfold this operator and see the actual inputs. Now, with the installation of RenderMan, there are a whole bunch of PIXAR materials. And here we have all these slots where we can input our textures into these various operators. And what we can do is, in the diffuse color, if we wish to use a texture slot, we can type in PIXAR to get all the PIXAR shaders. And now we can just type what it is that we want. So obviously texture, would be a good thing to start off with. You can see that there's a whole bunch of different texture-based materials. They even have a layered texture material where you can assign multiple textures and it will choose randomly which ones you want to use or layer them, or work with multiple textured layers using alpha. But I just want to do just a simple PIXAR texture. I just want to use a single texture slot. Perhaps we have a texture that was painted in substance that we wish to apply with our material, and we can rewire that into the diffuse color. Now the problem we have with the Houdini world, but dealing with textures, is we're dealing with rats generally for Karma. And in PIXAR land, we need to work with PIXAR textures. And for that, we can take a look at the RenderMan texture library. And in this particular scene, we can clear the cache. And because I pre-cached materials, I removed them for this presentation. So we can pick a root directory. And you can see that I've already got the directory chosen and it's already starting to convert the textures. But the way you would work like this is you would find the directory. In this case, in the RenderMan Art Challenge, I've collected a whole bunch of textures looking at reference textures that I might want to use. But this is the directory that I have all my images in that I wish to convert. So I'm going to select this folder. And you can see right away it's already started converting all those materials over for me. And if I open up the actual browser, we can see here all the materials that are being created. And you can see here there's a TIFF file and there's a text file. And the text file is RenderMan's proprietary MIP-map format. It used to be able to use TIFF. I don't know if that's still the case. But I know with Mantra, if you're using a TIFF file or a JPEG or any of the formats that we support, ping, they all get converted to RAT files behind the scenes, and there's a little bit of a hit. So in this case, they have a really nice editor that will automatically convert all of those texture maps to text files format. There's a couple more left to do there, so but you can see that it's converted almost all of them over, and it's working on those last two, generate the MIP levels for us. Now that's complete, we can go to the PIXAR texture, go back to our parameters, and now we can, under the file name, we can now browse all of those materials. And you can see we show the TIFF and the text files. It won't work with TIFF because if it's not the right map, but it will work with the text files. And so we're somewhat familiar with our weathered wood. So let's give that a go. So we can pick the text version of our converted file and we press accept. And now once we assign the porcelain material to our robot, we'll see that it should automatically update. Well, let's see what happens. I think that's correct. Robot, materials, and let's go to Karma. And let's go to RenderMan. And that is why we save frequently. So when I was flicking around the different renderers, Hydra, I guess, got in a state, or Houdini got in a state or something, and there was a slow death, so I saved you that. So that's why we save often at this point in time when we're starting to play around with the various render delegates. If you're just using RenderMan or Karma, you're not going to experience that very much. So let's go back to our materials and make sure that we're all back where we started off from. I lost my texture slot, so I'm going to unexpand this. And once again, I'm going to add that diffuse color. So PIXAR material, PIXAR texture, hit enter and put that down. And we're going to render the RGB. And as I said before, all the materials have been converted over. And now we just need to pick up one of those texture maps. And as I said, let's pick up let's go under assets, under textures. And here we can see down the bottom, there's our wood. And we're going to use the text version of that, press accept. And let's go up and ensure that we're still using that particular material, which we're not. So let's go back down into here, and we have to go to the material library because we're not picking it up autofill the materials. And now we can see we got our porcelain material, which is our hybrid material. And going back down to the pup robot, we can take our porcelain shader, drag and drop that into the slot. And sure enough, we get Houdini GL, and let's go to RenderMan. And now RenderMan should be picking up that texture slot So now we've got a wooden porcelain character. So that's how we add these texture slots. And for completeness, let's dive back into the material library and let's add that same texture slot to that particular material. So I'm going to stow this down to minimum. And this aluminum oxide material, the way we would do the same texture slot, let's copy this one, Control C, and double click inside of this material, Control V. And we can then wire that same texture slot inside of here. So you can add texture slots or any sort of modifiers inside of the PIXAR library of these VOPs, these material VOPs, and you can wire them together. And finally, for completeness, we have alumina oxide now also has a texture slot, and let's see how that works. So if we go to the ASMAT and the alumina oxide, let's drag and drop that, we should see no change. And sure we don't. And there you go. So we learned how to build some basic materials, how to build composite materials if you wish to use a hybrid approach to doing rendering in both Houdini GL, Karma, and RenderMan, or using pure materials inside of RenderMan to get your work done using the RenderMan ecosystem, the RenderMan materials. And now to continue on, let's do just a little bit of look development on the robot. Maybe you want to start adding some materials to the various different parts and using wildcards. So we've created the alumina oxide material. Let's actually take a look at the shoulder pads on the robot, see if we can add an interesting material on top of that. And there's some really nice materials within the library. And I like this one, so I'm going to add that one. And let's add this one. And right mouse, let's add the green. And let's see if they have some rubber. And let's see if they got blue rubber. I'm looking for some black rubber, violet rubber, blue rubber, pure rubber. And going back to the material libraries, material palette, remember, we got all these materials that got dumped into mat. We need to get them into here. So again, let's go in here. Let's pick these, Control X. And remember, we set the hotkey to 4. And let's make this directly a bit bigger. And Control V. And let's get them in there. And so we have some nice textures that we can use for the various parts of the robot. Go up. And in the metal library, let's do autofill materials. We don't need the texture library that much anymore. And let's have a look at how we might assign some materials to some shared parts. Obviously this model should have been using some mirror. I'm going to stow the play bar so we can get a little bit more real estate in here. And we can start taking a look at things like the antenna. And because we're going to be doing a lot of material, let's just add 5 more text. Let's go to 5 texture slots. And let's start adding a material on the antenna. And scrolling down, we can then add let's say gold metallic paint on top of that. But we want to take a look at the shoulder pad. So we can actually go to selection, turn secure selection off, and we can pick the one shoulder pad, just box select it, and actually go to the select tool. And let's make sure we're selecting the right thing. So let's select the leaf primitive, and let's pick this, and let's shift pick this. And we can see here now that we got 2 selections in the mesh, but they're in 2 completely different locations. Hopefully in some sort of a way that we can work with them. And we have the shoulder pad here, shoulder pad body shape, and further on down, shoulder pad body shape. So we have one there, one there. Let's box select this guy. And we can see here that, so we're going to drag and drop this first one right into there. And we can see that we picked up both shoulder pads. And then we can take a look at what's common. And we can leave it like that, or we can actually use hotkeys to have just a single simple entry. So we're going to take this first one out. And let's see if the naming conventions hold true. So we're looking for here L arm. So hopefully we can put a star in this slot. So we're going to use a star wildcard where the left arm, and let's hope that there's a left arm and a right arm. Star. And to that material, let's let's add, let's say, green metallic paint. And we can now see that we get green metallic paint. And you can go on and on doing look development this way. And inspecting the hierarchy, let's go to the robot. Let's collapse this. And let's take a look at some of the other things. We have the ears. Now you can apply texture slot to the ears, and down below we could actually pin a version of this scene graph, and we can have two versions of it if we want. Let's do pure rubber on the ears, and so on and so forth. So very quickly you can take a look at the various different pieces of the model. You can use a hybrid approach of selecting these materials in here. For instance, in the vents, you can probably pick up all the vents by picking the piece. There's your vent pieces. Let's drag that drop into there, and let's give the vent pieces a decent color. Let's try blue metallic paint. And there you go. So very quickly you can assign materials. Thank you for hanging out and watching these videos. Hopefully they'll help you get some really good look development and working with your models as you work on the RenderMan Ship Shape Art Challenge. Bye.